Recently, I've gotten in a couple of discussions with people about various types of gun defenses and gun disarms, and it got me thinking about some of the things I normally see when I watch gun disarms done on various YouTube videos and such. So here's just some commentary from me on concepts with respect to gun defenses and disarms. I'm not going to be doing any full techniques. I'm certainly not going to be showing how we get the attacker's attention off of us and how we get the gun offline in the first place. If you want to learn that stuff, come to a class. I'm not about to put on YouTube how we want criminals to make mistakes. But we're going to talk about some of the things that actually most commonly happen, or what the most common choices are in disarms, and some things you might think about when you're working on your own techniques. So the point is to show here exactly how little force the slide has and how little it takes to actually stop the slide from reciprocating after you take a shot. It doesn't take much to jam up the gun. And so if you're working any gun disarms or gun defenses or things like that, that's something to bear in mind. In this particular case, we've got Federal HST, the 124 plus P rounds. So fairly standard self-defense round, standard Glock 34. And there's a couple ways to demonstrate how easy it is, but for the most part, the simplest thing to do is simply stick your thumb behind the slide and pull the trigger. Okay. Obviously, this isn't something you do normally for fun, but it shows pretty clearly that it doesn't take much to stop the slide. We take the gun, point it safely downrange, put our thumb behind the slide like that, pull the trigger. Okay. We let go, and you can see that the slide didn't even move enough to reset the trigger. Okay. Pull that out. Cycle that out, and we can see we have the casing here, and that's it. The gun itself doesn't kick out the old casing, doesn't reciprocate the slide or anything like that. We can do something similar by grasping around the slide. That's common in a lot of disarms. And obviously, if you're going to do this on your own, which is really kind of a dumb idea, there's no reason to actually do this with a live gun other than, for example, demonstrating it this once. If you're going to do it, be careful. If this slide does happen to move a little bit, your finger gets caught in the ejection port, that's no fun. But the same thing simply happens. We take the gun, we clasp our hand carefully around it, far back from the muzzle. Okay, something simple as that, and then take a shot. Okay. Now in this case, you can see the slide did move slightly, but not very much. It did reset the trigger this time, so we can pull the trigger again, and we see that nothing happens because the slide simply did not move enough to kick out the old casing, which I've just dropped on the ground. Okay? It just doesn't take much to stop the slide. The gun does work, by the way, like it's supposed to. Thumb on the back, and it doesn't. Doesn't take much to make that stop. With me here is Ardina, who has volunteered to be the appropriate attacker in this case. So she's going to be pointing a gun at me periodically, which of course makes her happy. We're not actually using a gun. This is a CERT training pistol. It's a laser designator. So when she actually points it at me, no, it's not a real gun. So important thing there. So first off, let's talk about what normally happens. What are the choices immediately if getting a gun pointed at you? So I'm standing here. She's pointing the gun at me here. When we've got this sort of situation going on, you've got a couple of choices. Once you get the gun offline, there's only so many directions you can bring it offline. And so basically, you can either shift to the outside, you can shift to the inside, or in some cases, some people really like this idea of going under and driving it up. Now again, none of these comments are about how to get that initial offline, how to get them missing what's going on, not paying attention, etc. Do that without getting shot. Take a class. Okay, but once we're here, there's a whole bunch of ideas that different people have on what you do. If we're shifting to the outside here, or inside, or underneath, the most common choices seem to be either, one, some fancy version of a distance disarm, or some version of a body motion, and then we, cause themselves to shoot themselves. Or some version of, once we get there, either use a body motion, bring it to you and turn it, or whatever, but we jam it into them and use that as a basis for attacks.
Those pretty much seem to be the most common three things. So if we're on the outside somewhere, we're at a point where their primary weapons are turned away from us. If we're on the inside here, their primary weapons are unfortunately, toward us, where they can get at us. On the other hand, it's a lot easier for us to operate against their hand and arm because their hand and arm doesn't bend this way. If we're on the outside, their arm does bend that way. Okay, if we're doing the underneath thing where for some reason we've managed to knock it upwards and we're working on this sort of thing works too, and so on. But in a lot of cases, it's hardest to get to that point without getting shot. So the question is, which is the best choice? And it really depends. I mean, that's the most common answer to most self-defense situations. It depends. If we've managed to get this offline and we have shifted to the outside, what's best? Doing some sort of strip from the outside here, shifting in with your body weight and causing them to shoot themselves, shifting in, hammering into them, and doing attacks? It really depends. How big are you compared to the other person? I'm much larger than Artie is. If for some reason I can get this offline, okay, if I'm fighting the hands here to shoot me, all she needs to be able to do is turn her wrist and point it toward me, and I can still be dead. And so I have to be fighting that. Now I'm stronger than she is, and I'm bigger. The chances of me being able to fight her wrist are pretty good. But, on the other hand, it might be better for me to just jam it back into her, hammer her here, and cause her to shoot herself, or jam it into her simply because I'm that much larger than she is. If the situation was reversed, and I had the gun pointed at her, having the part where you're just jamming it into him probably wouldn't work very well for her. She's not that big. Yes, she can get at least 100 pounds of force moving into me. But if she doesn't do something immediately upon entering to cause me to stop fighting back, she's in trouble. Because effectively, we're at an equal range and an equal status at that point in time. So that's what we really need to think about. What choices can we make that make the situation most unfair in our favor? It's a self-defense situation. We don't want fair. We don't want an even footing or anything like that. If we happen to come in and jam the gun into the other person, now we're on a fairly equal footing. Unless jamming it in gets them so off balance that I get an uninterrupted strike in, after that point, and especially if the uninterrupted strike doesn't happen, after that point, we're in an equal situation. Okay, the person was fine with pointing a gun at me, so they're probably going to be pretty aggressive. Probably, not necessarily, but they might be. And if we're about the same size, everything's equal. Well, we don't want equal. If they're bigger than me, I'm probably in trouble. Being inside on a person who's larger than I am, where I have to devote time and effort to keeping a gun jammed into them, and then also have to try and do something to them when they can do things equally to me, might not be the best choice. On the other hand, maybe it's your only choice. Say they were pointing the gun at you, you somehow get it offline, you start doing something fancy, but they pull out of your range, and you're like, oh, I'm losing it, and you have to jam it into them. Okay? At that point, you're kind of stuck with it. But is that someplace where you want to go immediately? And again, it depends. If, for example, this person is huge compared to me, and I somehow get them offline in this fashion, do I want to sit here and try and fight against their arm like this? Not necessarily. Their wrist may be strong enough to hold me off for a second, and then they club me in the head with their other hand. That's a problem. Okay? Maybe they're small, but they're really fast. The same thing still might happen. So, what you really need to think about is, what can you do quickly and most safely? And again, it depends. But here's some things to think about. First thing to think about, if the gun's pointed at you, and again, we've managed to get ourselves offline somehow, where are you going to work on getting the gun offline? My personal choice is here on the wrist. Okay? Not grabbing for the slide here. If I do this, if I happen to mistime it, moving that out of the way may get me shot, but also if she pulls back just a little bit, then she's going to shoot me through the hand and then into my head. Getting back down here can work lots better. So I'd rather do that. I don't want to grab down here because then from there she simply points the gun at me and shoots me again, which is not really a good thing. So control like this, for various reasons, that's my personal preference. So now we've got control, whether it's on that side or this side. We at least have a hand on it, and the gun is offline in some way. After that, what do? Well, there's a lot of ones where you grasp it here, and then you come around and attack the arm in this way, and you fight over this. Anyone who's ever done this in force on force has found out that this person, if they're actually fighting back, it's really hard to twist a gun out of someone's hand. It's not impossible, but it's very hard. So, if I've moved to the outside, my personal tendency, unless the person is huge, is to bring the gun to me and use my body weight to do all the work for me. Yes, it's entirely possible they can hit me from here, which is why when I do it, I tend to drop my weight, get my head down, and work this way. They can still hit me, but it's hard to get good power from that sort of thing. If I happen to be on the inside, where it's like this, I actually do the opposite, which, yes, does involve me fighting this. But if I can get a hand here, I can work against where their arm happens to be trying to go. Okay, if I'm on this side, whenever I twist like this, their arm at least initially can move that way. If I'm on this side, it can't. And that can make a huge difference in terms of what's going on. You'll notice I'm kind of ignoring the underneath thing here. You can work that one out on your own. I have some strong opinions about it, but some people really like it. So I'm just going to leave that one alone. Okay. You'll notice kind of last on my list is the idea of jamming it into them. Because if I don't have good positive control over that wrist, trying to stop them from pointing it at me by merely... Hold on, put this across your body a little bit. By merely having pushed the arm against the body doesn't stop me from getting shot in the leg or the pelvis or something like that. I actually have to have a hand on the gun or on this. And jamming it into them might work really well, especially if I can work some elbows. But if I've got that good of a grasp in the first place, why don't I use my body to do other things and not move in close where they can very easily hit me with the other hand? Still lots of choices, and I'm not saying going in and jamming him is a bad idea, but it does put things on an equal footing. If you don't have a choice, maybe equal footing is better than everything else that may happen to you. But given a choice, I don't think I'd choose to go there first.